But anyway, I thought I'd start us off a little something different tonight that's going to tie to what we're going to be talking about. And you might be wondering how or why. But first, let me just say I'm thankful for my Savior Jesus. Continues to help me see myself as I truly am, a broken person that's codependent. And I struggle with my fears, false beliefs, and negative thoughts. And my name is Tanya. Hey, everybody. So big question tonight. Who are you? The part we didn't really get to on the song, which I should have played, was I really want to know. And the question is, do we really want to know? I think a lot of us walk around not knowing who we really are, or sometimes we think we know who we are, but we really don't know, or we just think that because we've always acted a certain way or did certain things, that's who we are because that's what we do, right? Sometimes we don't want to know, we don't want to face the things that we've done to learn more about ourselves. And so it's an important part of our recovery here in CR. We have to walk through the process to really get to know who are we in order to make progress and in order for God to do his work in transforming us to be like him. And so it's a journey. It takes time. It's a process. And one of the biggest ways that helps us do that and helps us to figure out and understand and see ourselves for who we are is when we do the inventory sheets. Those sheets do nothing but help us to get in touch with that, to help us see who we really are by what we're doing and what we've done. And so it's a very important part of the process. And the cool thing about it is when we get to finally see it, when we finally see ourselves and own it and take ownership of it, that's when we are getting prepared by God for him to do his transformation work in us, to change us and to make us more like him. But it begins with having to go through the discovery, to take the time, because it's a work in progress. And to be honest with you, this is a work in progress that will be until Jesus returns or we go home to be with him, because this is never going to end. This is the rest of our lives. Whether we choose to use CR to keep in touch and keep working on that, keep our recoveries going, continue to peel back the layers to become more like his son, or whatever way we choose to work on it, this is a process that will not end until the day we go to be in heaven. Now, before I go on and get on into tonight's lesson, I do have a very, 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 very important announcement that I need to share with all of you tonight. So many of you know that, or have heard, Pastor Dave has been hurting himself on a regular basis. In the past week and a half, he's banged his head twice. A few days later, he popped his knee, and it still looks really ugly, and he won't go to a doctor. And then he hurt his back this past weekend. So I decided somebody needed to intervene to help him do something to keep him from hurting himself further. So I came up with this great idea. I saw this GIF video. See the lady, she falls down the stairs and survived. See, she's doing it all over again. And I saw this GIF video and I was inspired. I thought, if that lady can fall down the stairs and be okay, maybe it might protect Pastor Dave from hurting himself. So I'm starting a fundraiser to buy Pastor Dave his own bubble. And I need to raise money first. So if you would like to support this mission to buy him his own bubble, please call 1-800-SAVE-DAVE. It's on the screen. 1-800-SAVE-DAVE to donate today. And don't worry, if you do not have any money and you can't afford to help support paying for his bubble, I need to put together a volunteer team to help Windex him every Sunday before service. So there's going to be a chance for you to participate one way or another. So,
I love you.
I know.
I'm writing it right
I probably, here's the first donation. Thank you for your bubble. I am not the only one that doesn't want you hurting yourself. Okay, my poor husband, I don't know how he puts up with me, and he still loves me anyway. I'll probably have to go home, fill an inventory sheet out on this later and make amends, but I'll deal with that later. But while I'm at it, I do have one other thing I want to tell you guys, and it has to do with the inventory. I'm getting back to the lesson now. Now I got to get serious and get back to what we're here about. But inventory is a very hard, difficult, most challenging part, probably next to testimonies, writing your testimonies to share for the first time, to do in CR. I can tell you from my own experience, when I did my first inventory over 10 years ago now, I struggled with it so badly, so desperately, and I was so frustrated with the process because I didn't understand the directions, and they put in the column headings for columns 3, 4, and 5. Some of the stuff in there they had written didn't make sense to me. I didn't know how to answer and put it into the columns. I went to my sponsor. She said, just do the best you can. And so 60 painful sheets later, I was done. And it wasn't fun, but I did learn a lot from having to do so many sheets, trying to figure it out, because I covered everybody under the sun in my entire life at the time, which I'm not saying to do because that was not right, and I'll be getting into that later. But by the time I finished, I began to see a pattern in how I was answering the columns. And then it began to make a little bit of sense to me about what they were asking me. So after that first time I did my inventory sheets, I tweaked CR's inventory sheets with different questions in those column headings for columns 3, 4, and 5 to hopefully help make it easier for you, but also to make it easier for me when I would fill those out in the future. But what I neglected to do, and this is what I want to apologize to all of you for, is there's a handout that we give you every time it comes to, if you're in a 12-step, we give you a handout and say, here you go, here's what you use to fill out your sheets. What it never dawned on me was that I never tweaked the handout to match my new tweaked sheet. So I'm giving you my tweaked sheet, and I'm giving you the old handout that goes with the old sheets. So it hasn't made any sense. So I probably further compounded many of your frustrations out there as you're trying to figure this out and do it. And so I just want to say I apologize for that. I got my act together. As a matter of fact, tonight when you're done, I have a new handy-dandy handout for you, fully completed to go with the inventory sheets you are already using. It explains everything of how you should be filling them out and what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. So I want everybody to pick one of these up. And as a matter of fact, any old stuff you have, throw it away. Any old inventory sheets you have, throw it away. I only want you to use this handout for doing your inventories and the handout sheets or inventory sheets I've given you. Now, everybody in the room needs an inventory sheet for tonight because I want you to be able to take notes. If you don't have one, please grab one on the back, or Digger bring, if you raise your hand, he'll bring you one. But I did make a bunch of extra copies, so if you want to pick up some to take home with you, you can. There's extras. I made sure to do that. But I want you to have one inventory sheet, so as I go through explaining how to fill it out, you can write down notes, anything to help make this easier for you. Because this is such an important and revealing part of our process and journey here, I really want you to get the most out of it. And I don't want you to be as frustrated as I was, because it can make you want to give up. It can make you not try. It can make you stop short, and I don't want that to happen. And so, with that being said, I hope I haven't frustrated anybody too badly that are working on it or been taking a stab at filling out those sheets. I believe after tonight's lesson, and if you use the new handouts with the current inventory sheets, you will have a much better idea of how to use those sheets and fill them out. Now let's talk about what to expect when we're filling these sheets out, especially when it's our first time. Because the truth is, and when this is what part we just got to own, it's going to be uncomfortable. It is never fun. It's never like, wow, I look forward to going home and working on my inventory sheets. And as a matter of fact, our fears are going to tell us a lot of the opposite. Oh, I don't need to go visit that because I've already dealt with that. Or, oh, my life's changed. Or, oh, that doesn't matter. You got to stop listening to all those excuses and thoughts. And I'm going to walk you through how you know what people to write on, what experiences you should be writing on. But you got to also watch out for, what are you telling yourself? Are you telling yourself you don't need it? You don't need to work on that? You've dealt with that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I can't tell you how many people I have revisited in the 12 steps I've done because I've had new issues come up or new areas I've triggered on that came up that were related to them. So sometimes there's people we have to go back and revisit and fill out new sheets on. So no excuses. So it's my hope and prayer that tonight after this lesson that you are going to feel so much more confident about filling out these inventory sheets. But first, let's jump in and begin by going over tonight's principle and step for tonight's lesson. Principle 4, openly examine and confess my faults to myself, to God, and to someone I trust. Happy are the pure in heart, Matthew 5:8. Step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And then the corresponding verse, let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord, Lamentations 3:4. So our first question tonight on our inventory sheets is, how do we start them? How do we start an inventory? Well, the first thing we got to do is be calm, whatever works for you. And as long as you're working with the Lord, pray this way, and write a list. Write a list. So that's where you begin. And I'm going to guide you on what to put on that list a little bit here. the first thing that should always be on this list, especially when it's your first time, is your mom and dad. We always got to go back and address mom and dad. We can't ignore mom and dad, even if we had great, wonderful parents, because sometimes, not sometimes, we all have parents that are not perfect. And the way they raised us, even if they're great and wonderful, they've still taught us some things that are probably unhealthy. Some people have been taught to be a people pleaser, or to be an enabler, or a fixer, or a rescuer. That doesn't make you a bad person, but you can't always identify what you learned from your environment you grew up in if you don't address them and go take a look at that and see who you are. So it's not that our parents are all abusive or everybody's parents are different. We all had different experiences, but you got to address mom and dad. Now, the only thing I want to mention about mom and dad is if you've been in an abusive home, you grew up in an abusive home, you might not be able to address mom and dad in the same first inventory. I don't know that I would encourage you to. There might be too much hurt there and pain there and issues there that you might pick mom for one and dad for the next 12 step that you do. You might need to separate them and sort them out. Pick the one that's most prevalent to what you're working on or the issues you're facing at the time, and save the other parent for the other one. Don't overwhelm yourself. That's my point here. You don't have to overwhelm yourself. You don't have to address every single thing in your first 12 step like I try to do, or you will be setting yourself up to be overwhelmed through this part of the process in the journey. So just know that. Please keep that in mind. You know, my first 12 step, I was dealing with the fear of abandonment. That was my first issue that I gave up in my 12 step. And this fear I knew tied to all the dads I had. I had the revolving doors of dads I grew up with. But there were also a lot of adult people throughout my life and being in the church that have left as well and have triggered that fear and those feelings of abandonment. So they all became an intense focus of my sheets in my first 12 step. But I didn't know better. So I added in so much more than I needed. I opened up so many wounds that it wasn't necessary. And I just wish I knew back then that to try and focus in on the people and events tied to what I was working on at that moment, both in my past and in my present. But I didn't. And so that's why I'm sharing this with you now. I want to save you some heartache and time. I want you to be able to get the most out of this part of your journey and process. So I want to share my mistakes, hoping that it might help you be able to accomplish more than what I felt like I got to do in my first 12 step. And if you're wondering, well, what's my issue? What am I working on? You know, what's my focus? Well, one of the ways to know the people that you want to put on that list to write about is think about how you introduce yourself. Like I just introduced myself dealing with codependency, fears, false beliefs, negative thoughts. So guess what people I'm going to think about? People that trigger my fears, people that trigger, or events that, you know, it's people or events, you know, trigger a fear, my false beliefs, my negative thoughts. What are those things? And those are some of the things I'm going to think about and write down on my list. Then I'm going to know to go back and address those things. Now, could there be new current issues that come up and happen to you and hit you over the head while you're in the processes? Absolutely. Write a sheet on it. Doesn't mean you stay just on that one focus, but that's what you try to hone in on. Because if we can hone in on what we are dealing with in here, we're going to make so much more progress in dealing with it and seeing what God wants us to do with it and how we need to change or how He needs to change us. And so try to stay focused and honed in. Also, I believe the inventory sheets are made in such a way to help us be focused. You know, there's a saying that's life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% of how we respond. And I feel like that's how these sheets are, the inventory sheets. If you look at them in your hands, I feel like that's how those are designed. If you look at them, if you look under the second column, which is the what happened column, that's a really skinny column. It's like 10%, because, right, columns 3, 4, and 5 are biggest, right? They're spread out, take up most of the sheet, right? Because that's not the most important part of what you're working on your inventories. The story, what you've been through, what you did, what happened, when, where, what you said, what they said, what was else going on, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What happened isn't as important as what we're going to discover when we process through that hurt or the hurt we've done through columns 3, 4, and 5. So that's why it's skinny, that's why it's small, and you got to make what you're writing fit into that column. It's not about writing out the entire story. It's not about telling about every detail of what's going on at that time. The other reason why I don't want you to, and I think it's wise that we aren't set up to tell all the details of our story is, if you're digging into some hurts here. You're going to be digging up some junk here that's going to be painful. And if we were to dig up every single painful experience, write about every single detail of it, and then express it out loud to our sponsor, you're going to re-traumatize yourself. You're going to cause yourself more emotional harm than good. And that's not the point of this process. It's not the point of CR, and it's not a point of this journey, and it's not a point of what we want you to do and do to yourself in doing your inventories here in this program. And so we want you to hone in on the details of the hurt that was specific that happened and not on all the story of it, because you can really dig up and cause yourself more trauma to yourself by digging up too much pain. I don't want you digging up every single memory. And so it's not what you need to do, and it's not the focus of this part of your journey. 3, 4, and 5 is our focus. So we're going to jump in and talk about how to fill out one of these bad boys. And you will see that the inventory sheet, like you have in your hands, is divided into 5 sections. And again, these column sizes are meant to help keep you focused on your specifics. You're not to go outside of them. You're not to add on pages to them. You're not to bring your journal and say, hey, let me read you what I put in my journal because there wasn't enough space on this inventory sheet. You have to keep it concise and to the point so you can stay honed in and focused on what you're working on. And that's why the columns are there and designed the way they are. So the other thing I want to encourage you with is do not worry if you don't fill out every column right. Don't worry if you accidentally put some things in column 4 that should have been in 3, or things in column 3 that should have been in 4, or vice versa, or whatever. That's going to happen. It's progress, not perfection. It's just about trying it, and doing the best you can. Your sponsor is going to help you to see if it needs to be moved over to a different category, or a different column, I should say, so you can get a better feel for how to fill those sheets out and learn as you continue to use it going forward in the future. So don't worry if you don't get it right. And tonight, I'm going to be using a sample sheet that I filled out at my first 12-step, years ago when I did my first 12-step. Now, it's on when someone hurt me, and I also have a sample of someone I hurt, and if we have enough time, I will go over that one with you too. I just don't know if I'll have enough time to get through both. But I give both these samples in my packet, so if I don't get to the someone I hurt, that copy of that inventory sheet is stapled to this packet, so you can check it out in case you're working on somebody you hurt. And you can see how I process through those details in the packet. So the first column that we're going to look at tonight is The Who. And no, I'm not asking you to write about the 60 bands member that we just was listening to of The Who, or what you thought of their music, or whether you knew them or not, even though that might be a whole lot easier and funner. But hopefully you've already made your list, and you know who that first person's name is and the age range that you're going to put on it. And again, it is important to identify your age range, because you might put childhood, you might put teenage years, you might put an actual age range. You could put 20s, 30s, 40s. Just keep it short and to the point. And do not cram multiple people or events onto the same page. Now, you're going to see in my example tonight, I did in the columns cram multiple ages, but I only did that for the sake of the lesson, and I did not write it that way when I did my inventory, so I just want to make sure to say that. They all had their own separate sheets, because like I said, there was 60 of them. 60 sheets, people, my first time. It was ridiculous. All right, so as you can see by my example, I was writing about my third dad. I put my age range, he was in my life, and that was it. Easy, right? We can do this, right? That's hard. That's not hard. We can do that. All right. Let's move on to column 2 now, which, as we already mentioned, it's not that big. This is the what happened. This is the 10%. We don't need a lot of details here. We are meant to focus in and hone in on the injury of the hurt or harm done to us or by us. Because it doesn't matter, again, it doesn't matter where or how long or what they said and what we said and all the details around it. Doesn't matter. Now, if you're struggling coming up with how it made you feel, what did you do, how did you react, then you can go to your journal, write about that specific event to help you get in touch with those memories. Sometimes we do have to write out some of these things to help us get in touch with them. And that's okay if you need to do that. But keep it short and brief again. Just try to work on bringing up the memories and what you did back then. And then transfer over the specific pertinent details that will fit into this column. As you can see from my example on the screen, I wrote down I was physically and emotionally abused. People know what that is. I don't have to get into all the details. I don't have to tell all the stories here on the sheet about how that happened. People know what that is. Now, did I tell my sponsors a couple of my stories? Yes, a couple of particularly painful ones that I never, ever shared with anybody. But I kept them short, concise. Most of my story fit in the column, and I just was trying to help my sponsor get to know me and know where I was coming from and what I had experienced so she could help me better fill out my sheets because I struggled so much with them. And I had a lot of blanks when I went in too on my columns, and she had to help me with. But I didn't write a story on every single person I filled out a sheet on. That's my point, is you might write a story or go into your journal and write about it on some of your sheets, but try not to do it on every single sheet. Try to go best off the people that you know are tied to what you're working on, past and present, and deal with that and see what God brings up. See what you remember. I just don't want anybody re-traumatizing themselves through this process. Okay, so when you do write, be specific, and also make sure you're not too vague. I know it's like, don't say too much, but don't say too little. So, for example, if you wrote, my dad was an alcoholic, that would be too vague. That doesn't say how he hurt you or harmed you. But if you said, Dad made degrading comments to me when he was drunk, then you listed the specific hurt or action that took place that hurt you when Dad was drunk. So you don't want to be too vague and just kind of generalize what somebody did. You want to be specific about what was the hurt or harm done to you or that you did to others. You know, when I was writing this lesson, I was thinking, you know, doing our inventories is a lot like going on vacation, right? I know you're probably all thinking, that's not the kind of vacation I want to go on. That doesn't sound like a very fun one to me. But well, just hear me out. So when we go on vacation, we may leave for several days, or we may leave for a week, or if we're really, really, really lucky, we might be able to leave for 2 weeks and go away for vacation. But what happens when it's done? We pack up, we go back home, because the hotel is just a place we visited, right? We don't live there. That's not our home. And it's the same with our inventories. We are to visit our past experiences. We are not to move in with our memories to the hotel of pain where we obsess and dwell over every detail without ever leaving, right? Amen? All right. Don't want you moving into the hotel of pain, all right? We got to visit there, write your sheets, figure out what you're putting on your sheets. And then we need to get back to living in the moment, living back in the present, living back, working our recoveries, doing what we need to do, what we're learning here in CR, and working our way across the sheet till we get through column 5 to see what we need to do or what does we need to change. And that's the other thing. When you start filling out the inventory sheets, you start in column 1 with the person's name, you work your way all the way across, all 5 columns before you take that sheet and move on to the next one. So all 5 columns, work your way across, and if you can't finish it, or if you can't think or remember your feelings, or you can't think or remember your actions or what to put in for the action plan in column 5, set it aside. Either you're not ready to answer that, or you're too young and you don't remember. Whatever the case is, just work it across as best as you can and then move on to the next one. And now let's go to column 3, the effect. This is the column, this is where a lot of people will struggle, and that's okay and that's normal, with writing down there, what did you feel, think, or believe? That's what we're writing column 3. So whatever event that happened to us, what did it make you feel? What were your emotions? What did it make you think and believe? Because our thoughts are what we tell ourselves, right? That's the self-talk that's going on in our head when the thing's happening to us, whatever it is that's going on. And those thoughts turn into beliefs. They turn into beliefs. And so it's important here, as you can see from my example, I crammed both my childhood feelings and beliefs and teen years feelings and beliefs in the same column here. But in reality, again, I did those both on separate sheets. But just for the sake of today's lesson, I crammed them together on one. But let's start with my childhood feelings and beliefs. As you can see in my example, my feelings were powerless, sad, helpless, ignored, unloved, fearful. My teen feelings evolved from that into fearful of others, numbness, and no self-image. And it could be that simple and easy. Identifying your feelings, again, is not telling the story about the feelings. It's just identifying your feelings, and it's writing it down there. Now, if you're struggling to identify your feelings, you can pray, ask God to help you remember them. But in the handout packet, there's 3 pages of feelings in there, feelings list, feelings that you can use to help you identify what you might have been feeling that you are struggling with coming up with how to describe them. You know, when I did my first 12-step, I relied so heavily on the feelings list because of the environment I grew up in and being too fearful and not being able to express my needs, wants, or thoughts. I had stuffed them for so long, ignored them for so long, that when I did my first 12 step, I didn't even know how to describe them. I didn't even know how to identify them. So use the feelings list if you need to. I used it a lot, especially my first 12 steps. And the more I found I came to CR, the more I kept talking about my feelings in share groups and talking about my feelings as I walked through the 12-step journey. I've been able to get better in touch with them and to be able to describe them without having to rely on it as much. But it's very important to be able to identify your feelings. And then I just want to mention, you can have one feeling, you can have 10 feelings. I don't care how many you have as long as you identify them in a short, concise way like I just showed you on the screen. But try to hone in the feelings that were the most prevalent, the most powerful, the ones that stood out the most to you in your memory from that event. And then we're going to talk about the beliefs. And again, like I said, the beliefs is, what was the self-talk? So what was the self-talk going on in your head when that event happened? What were you telling yourself either to survive or cope it or deal or not deal with it? And we all tell ourselves something. There is a thoughts that's running underneath and in our head when things were happening to us. And as you can see in my example, I wrote down my beliefs. I'll start with the childhood. I believed I was not wanted or worthy of love. And as a teen, I believed no one liked me and I would always be rejected and that men always leave. Those were my thoughts when I was going through it back that I could remember, the few thoughts I could remember growing up during my childhood with my revolving door and my stepdads. And so I wrote those down. Now, some of you may not remember what your thoughts were. You might remember your feelings, and you might not remember your thoughts. And that's okay if you don't. Don't worry about it. Fill out what you can. Fill out what you can and complete the columns, work all the way across. Some of it, as you do more of these, some of it might come back to you, and you might be able to come back and add to them. Some of them you won't. That's okay. You will still get something out of this. But the better we get at being able to list and describe our emotions and what we were thinking so we can see what our beliefs were, the more we're going to get out of this process and using this tool to help us recover and change. And it's also going to help your sponsor when you are reading it to them if you break it down like this. But again, if you can't remember what you were thinking, don't worry about it. Set it aside. Because I'd rather your sheets be as accurate and truthful as possible than for you to make up something just to say, well, she had that on there. I'm supposed to write that down. I'd rather you write what's truthful and right and accurate to your life and what you went through than you to make something up because you think you have to accomplish completing that column that way. I also want to mention this column, you're digging into your emotions. You're digging into your feelings. So guess what? You're going to be emotional. It's going to make you emotional. You're going to be bringing up things that you probably haven't felt or dealt with or expressed to anybody. So we're going to be more sensitive, moody, irritable, sad, tense, because we've opened up wounds that we may have never expressed or allowed ourselves to feel the pain from in our life. And we're telling somebody when we share these for the first time, a lot of times with our sponsor for the first time. So I want you to know it's okay to be emotional. Give yourself and each other some grace and extra support right now. Be sure you're attending share groups. This is a great time to be in share groups because that's a great place to express what you're feeling and be able to talk about it in there. I don't want you to stuff it. I don't want you to ignore it because God gave us our emotions for a reason. And one of the reasons is Matthew 5:4. He says, happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And when we're sad, we're in a position for God to meet us in the pain to help us give us comfort as we face what we need to face. Don't worry about what anyone else might think if you're emotional or crying. Just ask God to help you face and feel and expect his comfort in due time. You know, when I did my first inventory, I found myself actually mourning the childhood I never had. And sometimes the memories we will address will cause us to see the losses we suffered because of someone else's actions. And it's okay to grieve that. Just don't do this alone. If you don't have a sponsor or accountability partner yet, you need to get one as soon as possible. You got to keep on attending your share groups. All right, let's move on to column 4, the damage. And this is the column where we're going to identify our reactions and our behaviors that we use to cope. Did we run, hide, avoid, drink, ignore, stuff, eat, gamble, people please, start controlling, get angry, turn to porn, have a meltdown, leave town, lie, cheat, steal, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Because there are so many ways we react to people and painful experiences. In those moments, we feel powerless and helpless. But we need to be specific again when we fill out this column. And it's a bit wider. We got to a bigger and wider column now because we're going to need more space to talk about our reactions and our coping mechanisms. And if you're struggling to remember what you did, again, pray about it. Write about the experience in your journal and see what God brings up in helping you to remember about how you responded and reacted to that experience that you went through. As you can see in mine, under my childhood, my actions were to isolate, avoid, stuff my feelings, thoughts, and needs, became hypervigilant over my words and actions. As a teen, my reactions and coping mechanisms changed. I was full of insecurities and I had no self-esteem that I began seeking out acceptance and love in all the wrong places. I became sexually active and drank. I would reject boys before they could reject me, and I avoided talking to my parents. And then I got a job to escape. I don't have to say when or why or how or what prompted or motivated. Again, just be concise. The more concise you can be about expressing what happened, it's going to help you be the most productive when you're using your inventory sheets. And if you're struggling with trying to remember how you might have reacted or specific actions, I also have exhibits. Not only is there exhibits in here for feelings, there's exhibits of how we might act out of our feelings with our character defects. There's like 4 pages of it. So if you're struggling, identify how you might have acted out based off of what you went through, check out the exhibits with your new handout. Now, those exhibits were also in the old handout, so I'm copied, that section's the same, but those are so useful and beneficial to help us if we're trying to discover and be accurate with remembering what we did and during that time, and then we can write it down. And if you don't remember how you reacted, if you can't come up with anything, it's time to set that sheet aside and move on to a new sheet. If you can't get through column 4 and know what you did, then either it's too long ago or you've pushed it down so much it's just going to take more time before that memory is going to come back to you. So don't worry about it. Just set it aside. You can address it. You can come back to it later when you're done. Maybe by then, after you've done more sheets, you'll be better in touch with that. It can sometimes, depending on how long we have been closed down, shut off, pushed down, all the things that have happened to us, all the ways we've responded, all our feelings, everything we thought, it takes time to reopen that. And that's why I don't want you to overwhelm yourself. I don't want you to open up every single wound. I want you to be able to get the most out of this and try to hone in on the issues you're working on and maybe current issues as they pop up while you're living life and doing life today. Write about those as well. All right, so now we're to the biggest column of all, which is column 5. And column 5 has 4 parts. You just thought there's only 5 parts to this, right? Now you got to column 5 and found out there's 4 more parts. I know, I love to surprise you guys. But these 4 questions will help you make the most out of the information of what you just filled out on the first 4 columns. So these questions, and we're going to go through them one by one, will help you so that you will know how to take that information that you just filled out on the columns, especially columns 3 and 4, and know what to do with it now that you're into column 5. But before we take a look at this, I want to bring up the first question. I want to dive into this one a little bit because this one can throw people and it could mislead us from understanding how we could better answer the other questions if we don't answer this one right from the beginning. And it's, what part am I responsible for? What part am I responsible for? And a lot of us may have a hard time identifying our part, especially if we've been hurt. Because in our minds, we're not the hurters, so we're not responsible for what that person did. And sometimes that's true, but most of the time, that's a lie. Most of the time, that's a lie. Yes, it's true, we're not responsible for what somebody else did, but we probably did do something. We probably did. And I know we did, because I'm going to show you my example in a second. But the point I want to make here is there is only one exception to when we don't have responsibility, one exception, and that is when we've been abused. That's the only exception to us having no part of what somebody else did to us. But before I can go on, I want to go back and address how to tell what you're responsible for when you're filling this out. And I have this screen, the circle I found here on the screen. I always look at this when I go to answer this question because this really helps me to remember and to define my part and my responsibility. When I go to this is my responsibility in the center there, my words, my behavior, my actions, my efforts, my mistakes, my ideas, and consequences of my actions. That's what I'm responsible for. So that helps me when I answer column 5. What I'm not responsible for is other people's ideas, actions, consequences, beliefs, mistakes, and words. So that helps me to separate my actions from somebody else, what I do from somebody else. So when I come to this question, I can answer it more clearly and try to look and see and identify what were those things in the center that I did. And I'll be able to identify them by column 4, right? Because those are my behaviors. Those are my actions. And column 3 is my feelings. I'm responsible for those too. Column 3 and 4 is me. That's what I'm responsible for, except for when you've been abused. That's the only time you're not responsible, you have no part. As a matter of fact, Principle 4 has been rewritten for anybody who's been abused. It says, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, realizing all wrongs can be forgiven, and renounce the lie that the abuse was our fault. It's our responsibility to do the best we can to acknowledge that none of this was the abuse was our fault. Because by renouncing that lie is how we find freedom from the guilt and shame we might have been carrying around for our whole lives, thinking that we were responsible somehow or some way for someone else's abuse. So I just want to make sure to help clarify this question, because when I get into my responses, I hope this will make more sense to you. So when you see on my example on the screen, under the childhood section, not guilty for abuse or how I attempted to cope. As my childhood, not guilty. It's plain and simple, that's all I needed to write. But in my teenage years, you're going to notice that I wrote not guilty for abuse, but I did add that I acknowledge that my stepdads didn't force me to drink or become sexually active. I can stop blaming them for my choices and own how I coped back then, even as misguided as my choices were. It's so important to see when we were old enough to take where we made decisions of how to live, how we made decisions to cope or survive. And I find it very freeing to be able to own that and go back and see that and see myself, to see who I am, see who I was, see what I was doing. This is how I learned who's Tanya. That's who Tanya was back then. And this was eye-opening for me to see and realize that I could own my choices, as lost and misguided as they were, and I didn't need to blame my stepdads anymore for them. And when we can see and when we can stop pointing fingers at others for our choices, our actions, our words, our beliefs, our thoughts, then we start to learn the truth about who we are and why we did what we did and how we don't have to live like that any longer. It's humbling and it's hard, but I also found it to be very freeing. The second question we are going to address in column 5 is there anyone I owe amends or forgiveness to? And as you can see in my childhood example, I wrote, I need to work on forgiving my stepdad for the abuse, which I will work on later in the 12th step one time. And I wrote the same for my teenage years, but I added that I also needed to forgive myself for my poor choices. And I want to make sure to say here, when it comes to dealing with forgiveness, you are not expected, even if you just write down and acknowledge, yes, I know I need to offer forgiveness or I need to make amends, you're not expected to do it that moment. The whole point of writing and answering that question on these sheets is just learning how to acknowledge it, to just learn how to say it, just to learn how to get yourself to recognize it and become aware of it. So it's on our radar. We're going to have a lesson later in the year when we get to the forgiveness lesson where we'll talk about this, an amends lesson, which Digger always does. And you're going to learn more about this. And then you're going to know how to address it, how to do it right, how to do it in a healthy way, how to spiritually address forgiving somebody that's wholehearted and not in a way you're minimizing yourself or the pain of what you've been through. So just know, we're just looking for acknowledgement there, what you know, you are understanding what you need to do. Not expecting you to run out and do it at the moment. As a matter of fact, I don't want you to. I want you to wait until it's time and you learn about it in the 12 steps so you can do it in a really healthy way for you and a safe way, hopefully, too. So the next question is, are there any lies we need to replace with truth? Now, the only way you're going to be able to recognize lies is if you were in touch with what your thoughts or beliefs were. And those were back in column 3, right? We wrote our feelings first, and then we write our beliefs, which is whatever we were thinking. If you wrote some down, then you're going to take this question, and you're going to go back to column 3. You're going to look at beliefs, and what did you write down in there? What did you put down that you believed? Was it a lie? Were you lying to yourself to just cope and survive and get by and not have to deal with it, or maybe you're too young, you didn't know what to do with it or how to handle it? And if there's a lie, then we need to undo the lie, right? We need to replace the lie. We need to replace that belief because we can recognize now that's not how I have to live anymore, right? I don't have to listen to those lies anymore. I don't have to listen to that belief. But if we're going to tell ourselves, I don't have to listen to that belief, I better get a new belief, right? Because it's just not going to go away. It likes to stay up there and keep running that record in your head. So you got to start a new record, and you got to have something to put on that record. So as you can see from my example, I wrote yes. And based off my beliefs from column 3, I can see I had some big-time lies I was listening to. And here's what I wrote about my lies. I can stop listening to the lies that I wasn't wanted or worthy to be loved. And then I decided to find a new belief to tell myself instead, which was Psalm 139:14. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. And so when we want to get rid of a lie, we have to find a new belief to replace it with. Because those lies will come back, even when you find new beliefs. They will pop up. They will like to remind you they're there, and they want you to listen to them. But you can now tell it, I know you're a lie. That's not true. I don't have to listen to you anymore. This is what God's word says, and this is what I'm listening to. But you got to have a verse. You got to find a verse that speaks to you, that helps you, that motivates you, that encourages you, that speaks to that lie and contradicts it. Under my teenage years, I wrote, I don't have to fear being abandoned because God is always with me, no matter if others are or aren't. I then found a new belief to replace with the lies that my fears of abandonment back then, and it was Hebrews 13:5. Never will I leave you or forsake you. And that belief, it just helps me to remember that people will come and go in our lives. Most of the time, most people don't stay in our lives forever. And it's sad, and sometimes we have to grieve that loss because we'll miss them. But the truth is, people do that. People come and go. But God is always the same. He always is with me. He will be with me no matter what. I can rely on that truth. And that's the truth I have to hang and hold on to as people come in and out of my life. I had to change how I thought about it being abandoned, that I'm not being abandoned. It's just part of life. People come and go. I have to change how I view people leaving my life. And I have to mourn if I miss them. And I can be sad. But I also know that God is going to always be with me no matter what. I do have my Savior who's on my side, who will be here, who will not abandon me or make me feel abandoned. And in answering this question, I think this is the biggest revelation, if you're able to identify your beliefs, because it will help us to see how our beliefs misguide us and keep us from living in the truth. So if you get stuck here and you're not for sure what your beliefs were because you weren't able to write any down, don't worry about it. Just do your best. If you're not sure what verse to find to help you contradict the lies you've been listening to or the false beliefs, then wait, write a note there. Ask my sponsor when I read this to her or him, and ask them to help you with finding that verse that will help you with that. Just do the best you can, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because it takes time, it takes practice, just takes using these to get used to them. Because the thing I love about the inventory sheets is we do them for our 4th step in our inventory, but after our 12th step is done, we still use these. This is still a tool that we can take and use in our everyday lives. When someone calls me up, I'm struggling, I went through XYZ, and I'm going through this, I'm like, did you fill out an inventory sheet? No. Okay, go do that. Then call me back. Then I want to hear about it. And so it's so important. You can use this to help you sort out what you're struggling through. Because the truth is, and actually I'll wait till I get to this last part of the action plan before I go. I'm getting ahead of myself. So action plan. Just do your best you can answering those questions, and then you're going to get to action plan. And the action plan is, what should I do differently next time? What should I do differently next time? And for some of you, you're going to just summarize what you just wrote with the questions 1 through 3. That should have helped you right there, be able to know and summarize into what your action plan should be. So like for my example, you see under my childhood, I brought all my answers together in here, what I'm going to do. I'm going to work on the forgiveness process when time. I'm going to refuse to be defined by my past. I knew I needed to find a forgiveness verse, though, because when you've been abused, one of the hardest people that you'll ever forgive in your life is somebody who's really hurt or harmed you. It's going to be hard to let go of that. And it's going to be hard to let go of wanting to nurse that wound or hang on to it. And so I needed a verse to help motivate me. You might find this kind of odd that I picked this verse, but this is what motivated me. John 8:7. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, if any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. And that verse reminded me that I'm a sinner too. It's not my place to judge my stepdads or to refuse to forgive or let go of what they've done to me. Plus, quite honestly, I just don't want any stones thrown at me. That would hurt. That would be painful, people. And so that verse helped me to motivate me to say, okay, I need to work on this process when it comes time to forgive my fathers for the abuse I went through. They helped motivate me. And we always will need to find verses that speak to us, help us, guide us, and motivate us to make the changes that we're going to be stepping into. Under my teenage column, I wrote, I need to change my beliefs. I'm not a helpless child any longer. I can set boundaries with toxic or hurtful people in my life. I don't have to suck it all in or take others' abuse. And then I found a verse that helped me to have the courage to live in this truth. It's one thing to say that, it's another to live it, right? It's one thing to say that, we acknowledge that. It's another to say, I'm going to start putting out boundaries. I'm going to start saying no. I'm going to stop being a people pleaser. I'm going to stop enabling or fixing or rescuing or controlling or, so it takes courage to implement it. And so my verse that gave me courage was Psalm 118:6. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? And that verse gives me encouragement to live out, putting into practice my new boundaries, because quite honestly, it's another journey when we learn how to implement those changes we need to make, because people who've already known who we were, who we used to be, right? 4CR, who we used to be, not who we are now, they're not going to like some of our changes. They're not going to like when we come to them and say, yeah, that's not okay to talk to me like that anymore. Call me back when you could be nice and respectful. Or I'm not going to rescue anymore. Sorry, with my daughter, you're going to stay in jail. You're going to walk through the course of what needs to happen and get the help you need while you're there. It's hard, and it's not easy. Let me tell you, my daughter was not very happy. She did not say some very nice things. That's going to happen, and that's another part of the journey. It's like, how do I untangle that, and how do I live in this? Now I made everybody mad, because that's why we get into a lot of our habits, right? We don't want confrontation. We don't want to make people mad. We don't want them not liking us. We want everybody to love and accept us, but that's not a reality. So we live in pretend world, pretending to be what we think we need to be in order to be loved and liked by everybody, instead of learning how to be authentic, to be who we really are, to be who God created us to be. The only way we can be that person is if we're living in truth. And the only way to live in truth is to know who we are and what we're doing and why we do it, so God can help us change it and make changes that are lasting, changes that are impactful, changes that make a difference and transform us from who we are today into becoming more than we are. And so it's what's so amazing about this program and what we can do in here. And that's why this lesson is so important to me, and why I want you to get so much out of this part of the journey, because it can help us so much when we use these sheets, if we learn how to use them right and not be afraid of them and not afraid to put anything down on them that we need to. Not too much, remember, don't jug up every hole, every issue, every painful thing, but it will make a difference, and it will help you so much in your recoveries if you get comfortable with filling these out regularly. And not just for when you're in your 12th step, doing your 4th step part, but anytime you're struggling, pulling one out and using it. So a few final reminders, because I am way over time. Keep it balanced. Keep your inventory balanced. So when you're filling out your sheets, you need to turn it over and write something positive. You could write a positive memory. You could write about an award, an accomplishment. But some of you, and even myself, I had one positive thing from my childhood I could think of to write. It was that I could go horseback riding. We always lived on a ranch. I was able to go out every day after school, go horseback riding, take off across the desert. It was the only time I could escape. I felt like I had some control because I could control the horse. And that was my escape. That was the only positive memory. So a lot of my childhood memories were I got to go escape on my horse. I loved it. But sometimes another thing you could do, some people can't even think of one. Some people have such horrific memories or childhoods, they can't think of one. And if that's the case for you, one of the sheets that's in the handout is called Character Assets. Find a character asset about yourself. You can write, I'm a loving person. I'm kind-hearted. I'm generous. I'm forgiving. I'm respectful. You find a character asset about yourself, you put that on there. Because you know what will happen if you keep writing one negative sheet after another negative sheet after another negative sheet? Guess where you're going to go? You're going to spiral down. But if you turn it over and write something positive, and try to write more than one if you can, find a couple character assets about yourself you could write on there, then you bring yourself and lift yourself back out so you can move on to the next sheet. You've got to write something positive on the back. Can't emphasize that enough, how important that is. The second thing, if you're overwhelmed with emotions, please reach out. As part of the process, part of the journey. Sometimes we just get emotionally overwhelmed because there might have been a lot of emotions we've pushed down and stuffed down for a really, 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 really long time, and now we're letting it come up. We're inviting God into that pain, asking Him to help us to see it and feel it and express it and do with it what we need to and allow Him in to heal it like He wants to, how He's been waiting to, but we just weren't ready or able to let Him into it. So, reach out if you need to, sponsor accountability partners, go to share groups. Those are the great places to share those feelings and those emotions and reaching out when you're struggling. Lastly, don't leave your sheets out for anyone to find them. Put them someplace safe. I don't care if you're putting it in a Ziploc baggie and hiding it in your toilet tank. Put it someplace safe. You do not leave them sitting out for anybody to find, because some of us are married in here and you might be writing about your spouse. We're going to hurt each other. I hurt Dave, he hurts me. That's part of life. And I don't want him to have to come across it that way. I'll just tell him. But there might be others that, you didn't tell your spouse and you don't want to leave that out. That would cause more hurt than good. So please put them away. I don't care if you lock them in your trunk, lock them in a desk drawer, whatever. Just don't keep them out where somebody could stumble on it and then cause more hurt to your recovery process.